Welcome to Stoic Vivu, where ancient wisdom meets modern life. I'm here to help you discover how 2,000-year-old philosophy can solve the problems you're facing right now, today, in your actual life. Our mission is simple. Take the most powerful ideas from history's greatest thinkers and show you exactly how to use them when your boss is driving you crazy, when your bank account is stressing you out, or when everything seems to be falling apart at once. Most people don't wake up thinking, "You know what would fix my problems? Ancient philosophy." But here's what they don't realize. Philosophy was never meant to be abstract academic theory. The ancient Greek philosopher Epictetus said that vain is the word of the philosopher that does not heal the suffering of man. Think about that for a moment. Philosophy was supposed to be medicine for the mind, practical tools for handling life's inevitable difficulties. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. These weren't ivory tower intellectuals debating meaningless concepts. Marcus Aurelius ran the Roman Empire while fighting wars on multiple fronts. Epictetus was literally a slave who gained his freedom through wisdom. Seneca advised emperors while managing vast business enterprises. They developed their philosophy not in comfortable libraries, but in the middle of real crises, genuine hardships, and overwhelming responsibilities. Today, you're going to learn 7 ancient Stoic secrets that can transform how you handle every challenge in your modern life. These aren't feel-good platitudes or motivational quotes. They're precise mental tools that have been tested by history's most successful people under the most extreme circumstances. Here's what makes these secrets so powerful. They work regardless of your circumstances. Whether you're dealing with a difficult relationship, a demanding career, financial pressure, or just the general stress of living in our always connected world, these 7 principles will give you something most people never develop: unshakable inner strength. The Stoics believed that we suffer not because bad things happen, but because we don't know how to think about what happens to us. They discovered that by changing how we perceive and respond to events, we can maintain peace and clarity even when everything around us is chaos. Think about the most centered, confident person you know. The one who stays calm under pressure, who seems to handle setbacks with grace, who never appears overwhelmed by circumstances. What you're seeing isn't luck or natural talent, it's philosophical training. They've learned to apply these same principles, whether they realize it or not. Over the next few minutes, you're going to discover exactly how they do it. Each secret builds on the previous one, creating a complete system for mental resilience. By the end of this video, you'll have a toolkit that can change not just how you handle problems, but how you experience life itself. Let's begin with the first secret, and I promise you, once you understand this fundamental principle, you'll never waste energy the same way again. Secret number 1. Why you're exhausted. The one thing you must stop doing today. Consider this scenario. Sarah, a marketing manager in downtown Chicago, starts her Monday morning already feeling defeated. She's worried about the presentation her boss might not approve, stressed about the traffic she can't control, anxious about her coworkers' attitude she can't change, and frustrated by the economy she can't influence. By 9 a.m., she's already mentally exhausted, and she hasn't even begun her actual work. Sound familiar? Sarah is experiencing what millions of people face every day: the crushing weight of trying to control things that are completely outside her power. She's discovered the hard way what the ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus identified as the root cause of human suffering over 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before gaining his freedom, understood powerlessness better than almost anyone in history. Despite his circumstances, or perhaps because of them, he made a discovery that would become the foundation of all Stoic wisdom. He realized that there are only two categories of things in this world: what's up to us and what's not up to us. Everything that exists falls into one of these two categories, with no exceptions. Here's what Epictetus meant by this fundamental distinction. The things that are up to us include our thoughts, our judgments, our decisions, our actions, and our responses to events. These represent our sphere of control, the tiny slice of reality where we actually have power. Everything else, other people's behavior, the weather, the economy, the past, the future, what others think of us, whether we get sick, whether we get promoted, falls into the category of things not up to us. The revolutionary insight that Epictetus shared was this: the chief task in life is discerning what's up to us and what's not up to us, what's in our control and what's not in our control. This principle, known as the dichotomy of control, isn't just a philosophical theory. It's a practical tool that can immediately transform how you experience daily life. Think about how most people approach problems. When their boss criticizes their work, they spend hours ruminating about their boss's unfairness. When the stock market drops, they refresh their portfolio obsessively, as if watching the numbers will somehow change them. When someone cuts them off in traffic, they carry that anger for miles, letting another person's 5-second action ruin their entire commute. Here's what's happening in these situations. People are pouring their limited mental energy into things they cannot control while neglecting the things they actually can influence. It's like trying to steer a car by grabbing the hood ornament instead of the steering wheel. Not only does it not work, but it prevents you from using the tools that actually would make a difference. Let's return to Sarah's Monday morning and see how understanding this principle changes everything. Instead of worrying about whether her boss will approve her presentation, she focuses on making the presentation as clear and compelling as possible. Instead of stressing about traffic, she uses her commute time for audiobooks or planning her day. Instead of trying to change her coworker's attitude, she focuses on her own professional responses and communication. The transformation isn't just mental, it's practical. When Sarah directs her energy toward what she can actually influence, she becomes more effective at work, more peaceful at home, and more resilient when challenges arise. She's discovered what Epictetus meant when he said that if something is up to you, it deserves 100% of your energy. If it's not up to you, it deserves 0% of your concern. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the vast Roman Empire, practiced this same principle daily. He couldn't control whether barbarian tribes would attack his borders, but he could control how well his armies were prepared. He couldn't control whether senators would support his policies, but he could control how clearly he communicated his vision. He couldn't control whether plagues would strike his empire, but he could control how resources were allocated for relief efforts. The practical application of this principle begins with a simple question that you can use immediately. Is this up to me? Before you spend mental energy on anything, a worry, a frustration, a problem, pause and ask yourself this question. If the answer is yes, then engage fully. Bring your complete attention and effort to bear on the situation. If the answer is no, then consciously redirect that energy towards something you can actually influence. This shift requires practice because our brains are naturally wired to focus on threats and problems, regardless of whether we can do anything about them. It's an ancient survival mechanism that served our ancestors well when they faced immediate physical dangers, but it works against us in our modern world of complex, ongoing challenges. The secret lies in understanding that your peace of mind and effectiveness in life are directly proportional to how well you can distinguish between these two categories. Every moment you spend trying to control the uncontrollable is a moment stolen from building something meaningful in your sphere of actual influence. Ultimately, this first Stoic secret reveals why so many people feel exhausted by life. They're fighting battles they cannot win while neglecting the battles they could easily win. Once you learn to identify what's truly up to you and direct your energy accordingly, you'll discover a level of clarity and power you never knew was possible. This foundation of understanding what we can and cannot control naturally leads us to the daily practice that reinforces it. A habit so simple yet so transformative that it shaped the mind of history's most powerful emperor. Secret number 2. The 5-minute morning habit that built Rome's greatest emperor. Imagine walking into the tent of Marcus Aurelius at dawn, somewhere along the Danube River frontier around 170 AD. Outside, you can hear the sounds of a Roman military camp awakening. Soldiers preparing for another day of defending the empire's northern borders. Inside the tent, the most powerful man in the world sits quietly with a piece of parchment, writing thoughts that were never meant for anyone else to read. What Marcus Aurelius was doing in those early morning moments would become one of history's most influential books, though he had no intention of creating a book at all. He was simply practicing a daily habit that kept him centered, focused, and philosophically grounded despite carrying responsibilities that would crush most people. This habit was so fundamental to his effectiveness as both emperor and human being that it literally shaped the course of Western civilization. The practice Marcus Aurelius was engaged in was journaling, but not the kind of journaling most people imagine. He wasn't recording events or describing his feelings. Instead, he was having a daily conversation with himself about how to live well, how to handle challenges with wisdom, and how to remember what truly mattered when the pressures of leadership threatened to overwhelm him. These private morning reflections, which we now know as meditations, reveal a man working through the same fundamental challenges that modern people face every day. He wrote about dealing with difficult people, managing frustration, staying motivated when things went wrong, and maintaining perspective when success threatened to inflate his ego. The only difference was that his difficult people were Roman senators and barbarian kings, and his workplace stress involved governing 50 million people across 3 continents. Here's what made Marcus Aurelius's journaling practice so powerful. It wasn't just random thoughts or emotional venting. It was structured philosophical training, a daily workout for his mind and character. Each morning, he would remind himself of key principles, work through specific challenges he was facing, and recommit himself to the kind of person he wanted to be. The Roman statesman Seneca, who lived a generation before Marcus Aurelius, described this same practice with remarkable clarity. He wrote about putting each day up for review, examining his actions, thoughts, and decisions with the honesty of a judge evaluating evidence. Seneca understood that self-improvement was impossible without self-awareness, and self-awareness required the kind of honest reflection that only came through regular, disciplined examination of one's daily life. Let's bring this ancient practice into a modern context with someone like David, a software engineer in San Francisco who discovered the Stoic habit during a particularly stressful period at his startup. David found himself constantly reactive, snapping at teammates during code reviews, losing sleep over features he couldn't control, and carrying work stress into his personal relationships. Following the Stoic model, David began setting his alarm 5 minutes earlier each morning to write in a simple notebook. He wasn't trying to solve complex problems or plan his entire day. Instead, he was asking himself 3 basic questions that Marcus Aurelius might have recognized. What kind of person do I want to be today? What challenges am I likely to face? And how can I respond to them with wisdom rather than emotion? What did I learn yesterday that can make me better today? The transformation didn't happen immediately, but within weeks, David noticed something remarkable. The same workplace conflicts that used to derail his entire day became manageable challenges he could think through clearly. The same coding problems that used to frustrate him became interesting puzzles he could approach with patience. The same relationship tensions that used to escalate became opportunities to practice better communication. What David had discovered was the same principle that allowed Marcus Aurelius to govern effectively while maintaining his philosophical integrity. The act of writing forces clarity of thought in a way that simply thinking does not. When you write down your thoughts, you must organize them, examine them, and often discover that what seemed overwhelming in your mind becomes manageable on paper. This isn't about spending hours analyzing every detail of your life or getting lost in introspection. The most effective Stoic journaling is brief, focused, and action-oriented. You're not trying to solve every problem or understand every emotion. You're creating a daily opportunity to step back from the immediacy of life and remember what you've learned about handling challenges well. The physiological benefits of this practice align perfectly with what modern neuroscience tells us about emotional regulation and decision-making. When you write about stressful situations, your brain literally processes them differently, moving the emotional response from the reactive limbic system to the more thoughtful prefrontal cortex. You're training yourself to respond rather than react, to think rather than just feel. Marcus Aurelius wrote his thoughts in Greek on military campaigns during one of the most demanding periods of Roman history. Seneca wrote his reflections while managing vast business interests and advising Emperor Nero. Neither man had perfect circumstances for philosophical practice, yet both understood that wisdom requires daily cultivation, regardless of external conditions. The secret they discovered was that 5 minutes of honest self-reflection each morning creates a foundation of clarity that influences every decision you make throughout the day. You're not just recording thoughts. You're training your mind to approach life's challenges with the same philosophical discipline that enabled these ancient leaders to thrive under extraordinary pressure. This daily practice of self-examination and philosophical reflection naturally leads us to the next secret, one that might seem counterintuitive in our comfort-seeking culture but represents one of the most powerful tools for building mental resilience. Secret number 3: why smart people choose discomfort and how it saves your life. Picture this scene. It's 6 a.m. on a freezing January morning in Boston. While most people are bundled under warm blankets, hitting the snooze button for the 3rd time, Jessica stands at the edge of a frozen pond in Franklin Park. She's wearing minimal clothing, and she's about to do something that every instinct in her body is screaming at her not to do. She's gonna jump into water that's barely above freezing temperature. Jessica isn't crazy, and she's not trying to prove anything to anyone. She's a successful attorney who discovered something that ancient Stoic philosophers understood 20 centuries ago. Deliberately choosing discomfort when you don't have to makes you exponentially stronger when discomfort chooses you. This practice, which the Stoics called hard winter training, represents one of the most misunderstood yet powerful concepts in all of philosophy. Epictetus, who knew about involuntary hardship from his years as a slave, taught his students that they must undergo hard winter training by deliberately exposing themselves to cold, wearing simple clothing, and abstaining from unnecessary luxuries. At first glance, this might seem like pointless suffering or some kind of ascetic extremism. Why would anyone choose to be uncomfortable when they could be comfortable? The answer reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology that modern science has only recently begun to validate. The Stoics recognized something crucial about how resilience actually develops. It's not built during easy times, but through deliberate practice under challenging conditions. Think of it like physical fitness. You don't build muscle by lifting light weights that feel comfortable. You build strength by progressively challenging your muscles with resistance that initially feels difficult, even painful. Mental and emotional resilience work exactly the same way. When you voluntarily expose yourself to manageable discomfort, you're training your mind to remain calm and clear thinking under pressure. You're discovering that you can handle more than you thought, that discomfort is temporary, and that your capacity for dealing with difficulty is much greater than your fears suggest. Let's examine how this principle played out in Jessica's life. As a litigation attorney, she regularly faced high-stress situations, hostile depositions, aggressive opposing counsel, and clients whose futures depended on her performance. Before she discovered cold water training, these situations would trigger intense anxiety that affected her sleep, her relationships, and her effectiveness in court. The transformation began when Jessica started taking cold showers every morning. At first, the shock of cold water was genuinely unpleasant, triggering her fight-or-flight response just like a stressful work situation. However, something remarkable happened as she continued the practice. She learned to breathe through the discomfort, to relax her body despite the challenging stimulus, and to maintain clear thinking even when every impulse wanted her to escape. This daily training had an unexpected side effect. The courtroom situations that used to overwhelm her began feeling manageable. When an opposing attorney raised his voice, instead of feeling her heart race and her thoughts scatter, Jessica found herself responding with the same calm presence she'd cultivated during her cold shower practice. She had literally trained her nervous system to remain stable under pressure. The neuroscience behind this practice is fascinating. When you voluntarily expose yourself to controlled stress, whether it's cold water, intense exercise, or any other manageable challenge, you're teaching your brain that you can handle difficult situations without being overwhelmed by them. You're building what researchers call stress inoculation, developing confidence in your ability to cope with whatever life throws at you. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle intuitively. Despite being the most powerful man in his world, he regularly practiced voluntary discomfort. He would sleep on hard surfaces when he could have slept in luxury, eat simple food when elaborate meals were available, and expose himself to harsh weather when he could have remained comfortable indoors. These weren't arbitrary acts of self-punishment. Marcus Aurelius was preparing himself for the inevitable moments when comfort wouldn't be an option. During military campaigns, natural disasters, political crises, or personal tragedies. By voluntarily experiencing discomfort during peaceful times, he was building the mental resources he would need during unavoidable hardships. The modern applications of this principle extend far beyond cold water or physical challenges. You can apply hard winter training to any area where you want to build resilience. This might mean having difficult conversations when you'd rather avoid them, tackling challenging projects when you could choose easier ones, or maintaining your exercise routine when motivation is low. The key insight is understanding the difference between voluntary and involuntary discomfort. When you choose discomfort, you maintain control over the situation. You're building strength from a position of power, training yourself like an athlete preparing for competition. When discomfort is imposed on you by circumstances, you're reacting from a position of weakness, often feeling overwhelmed and helpless. Consider how this applies to common modern challenges. If you practice saying no to social media when you're craving distraction, you'll find it easier to focus during important work projects. If you practice eating simple, healthy food when you're tempted by junk food, you'll develop the self-discipline that carries over into every area of your life. If you practice waking up early when you'd rather sleep in, you'll build the mental toughness that serves you during genuine emergencies. Essentially, voluntary discomfort is like making deposits in a bank account of mental resilience. Each time you choose the harder path when an easier one is available, you're building psychological capital that you can draw upon when life inevitably presents you with challenges you cannot avoid. Building on this foundation of deliberate mental training, we can now explore how our thoughts themselves shape our entire experience of reality, and how understanding this process gives us unprecedented power over our emotional lives. Secret number 4. How your brain tricks you into misery, the Shakespeare solution. Let me set the scene. Michael, a project manager in downtown Los Angeles, receives an email from his boss at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. The subject line reads, "We need to talk Monday morning." Within seconds, Michael's mind creates an elaborate story. He's convinced he's about to be fired. He imagines the conversation, anticipates the embarrassment, and starts mentally calculating how long his savings will last. His weekend is ruined, his sleep is disrupted, and his anxiety levels skyrocket. All because of 6 words in an email. Monday morning arrives, and Michael discovers that his boss simply wanted to discuss his promotion to senior project manager. The urgent conversation was about increased responsibilities, a salary raise, and recognition for his excellent work. The misery Michael experienced for an entire weekend was created entirely by his interpretation of neutral information. This scenario illustrates one of the most profound insights in all of Stoic philosophy, one that Marcus Aurelius captured perfectly when he wrote that our life is dyed by the color of our thoughts. The events that happen to us are essentially neutral. It's the story we tell ourselves about those events that creates our emotional experience. William Shakespeare understood this same principle when he wrote in Hamlet that there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This wasn't just poetic language. It was a precise description of how human consciousness actually works. The external world presents us with raw data, words, actions, circumstances, changes, and our minds immediately begin interpreting that data, creating meaning, and generating emotional responses based on the stories we construct. Here's where most people get trapped. They mistake their interpretation of events for the events themselves. They believe their thoughts about what happened are equivalent to what actually happened. This confusion between objective reality and subjective interpretation is the source of most human suffering. The Stoics developed a revolutionary approach to this problem by teaching people to distinguish between facts and interpretations. They understood that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we have tremendous power over how we interpret what happens to us. This distinction between events and our thoughts about events represents one of the most practical tools for emotional freedom ever discovered. Consider how this principle applies to common situations that trigger stress and unhappiness. When the stock market drops, the objective fact is simply that numbers on a screen have changed. The market itself is neither good nor bad. It's just information about buying and selling activity. However, people immediately create stories about what this means. I'm going to lose my retirement. The economy is collapsing. I should have sold everything last week. These stories, not the market movement itself, create the emotional turmoil. The same pattern occurs in relationships. When someone doesn't respond to a text message quickly, the objective fact is simply that a communication hasn't been returned within a certain time frame. But minds immediately start generating interpretations. They're angry with me. They don't care about our relationship. I must have said something wrong. The anxiety comes from the story, not from the silence itself. Weather provides another clear example of how thinking shapes experience. Rain is simply water falling from clouds, a completely neutral physical phenomenon. Yet people consistently describe weather as good or bad, beautiful or terrible, based entirely on their preferences and plans. The Stoics pointed out that there's no such thing as bad weather, only weather that conflicts with our desires. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction daily, training himself to see events as objectively as possible before adding any interpretation. When faced with political opposition, military challenges, or personal setbacks, he would first identify the bare facts of the situation, then consciously choose how to think about those facts in ways that served his goals and values. This practice requires developing what modern psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to step back from your automatic thoughts and examine them critically. Most thoughts happen so quickly and automatically that we don't realize we're interpreting rather than simply observing. The Stoic approach involves slowing down this process and learning to catch yourself in the act of creating meaning. The practical application begins with a simple question that you can use immediately. What story am I telling myself about this situation? When you notice yourself feeling upset, anxious, or frustrated, pause and identify the specific interpretation that's creating your emotional response. Often, simply recognizing that you're dealing with your thoughts about events rather than the events themselves creates enough space to choose a different interpretation. This doesn't mean adopting false optimism or pretending that challenging situations aren't actually challenging. The goal isn't to convince yourself that everything is wonderful when it clearly isn't. Instead, the goal is to see situations as clearly as possible, without the distortion that comes from unconscious interpretation, so that you can respond effectively rather than react emotionally. The power of this approach becomes clear when you realize that most of your emotional suffering comes not from what's happening, but from your thoughts about what's happening. By learning to observe and consciously direct your thinking, you gain access to a level of emotional freedom that most people never experience. With this understanding of how our thoughts shape our reality firmly established, we can now turn to discovering how this same awareness can transform even the most mundane moments into sources of genuine satisfaction and wonder. Secret number 5. The weird way to find happiness in your boring life. Visualize this. Emma, a data analyst in Manhattan, sits on the subway during her daily commute to work. Around her, fellow passengers stare at their phones, lost in social media feeds, trying to escape what they perceive as another tedious moment in their ordinary lives. But Emma is doing something completely different. She's studying the way morning light filters through the subway car windows, creating shifting patterns on the metal floor. She notices how a businessman's coffee cup trembles slightly with each track vibration, and she observes the concentrated expression on a student's face as she reads her textbook. To anyone watching, Emma might seem like she's simply daydreaming or wasting time. In reality, she's practicing one of the most transformative exercises in Stoic philosophy. An exercise that Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor in history, used to find profound beauty and meaning in the midst of what others saw as mundane or even unpleasant circumstances. Marcus Aurelius had access to all the spectacular entertainment, luxury, and beauty that the Roman Empire could provide. He could have spent his time admiring magnificent architecture, elaborate artistic performances, or exotic treasures from across the known world. Yet when he wrote his personal reflections, he didn't describe the Colosseum's grandeur or the splendor of imperial palaces. Instead, he wrote about finding wonder in completely ordinary things, the way a stalk of grain bends under its own weight, the subtle sound that a grape makes when it's picked from the vine, or the distinctive furrow that appears in a lion's brow. This wasn't mere poetry or philosophical decoration. Marcus Aurelius was documenting a deliberate practice that he used to maintain psychological balance and genuine contentment even while surrounded by the violence, political intrigue, and overwhelming responsibilities of ruling an empire. He understood something about human happiness that most people never discover. Satisfaction comes not from experiencing extraordinary things, but from experiencing ordinary things with extraordinary attention. The principle behind this practice reveals a fundamental truth about how happiness actually works. Most people believe that contentment requires special experiences, exciting events, or favorable circumstances. They think happiness will arrive when they get the promotion, find the perfect relationship, travel to exotic destinations, or acquire material possessions they've been wanting. This approach treats happiness as something that exists outside themselves, waiting to be discovered in the right external conditions. The Stoics recognized this as a fundamental error in thinking. They understood that happiness is not something you find in the world around you, but something you create through the quality of attention you bring to whatever world you're already in. This insight completely reverses the typical approach to satisfaction and reveals why so many people remain perpetually disappointed despite achieving their goals. Here's how this works in practical terms. When you actively look for beauty in ordinary circumstances, you're training your mind to derive satisfaction from experiences that are readily available rather than constantly seeking satisfaction from experiences that are rare, expensive, or dependent on external circumstances. You're developing what we might call appreciation skills that work regardless of your situation. Emma discovered this principle during a particularly difficult period in her life. She was working long hours at a job she didn't love, living in a small apartment she couldn't afford to improve, and feeling generally stuck in circumstances that seemed far from her ideal life. Instead of waiting for her external situation to change, she decided to experiment with changing her internal approach to the situation she was already in. The transformation began with small observations during her daily routine. She started noticing the intricate geometric patterns in the office building's lobby tiles, the way afternoon sunlight created interesting shadows on her desk, and the subtle variations in people's walking rhythms on the street outside her window. Initially, this felt like a minor distraction from her real concerns, but something unexpected happened as she continued the practice. Emma began experiencing moments of genuine wonder and appreciation throughout her ordinary days. The same commute that used to feel like wasted time became an opportunity for discovery. The same office environment that used to feel sterile and oppressive became a place where she could find small moments of beauty and interest. Her external circumstances hadn't changed at all, but her experience of those circumstances had transformed completely. This practice works because it addresses a fundamental aspect of human psychology. We tend to focus on what's missing, what's wrong, or what needs to be different, rather than noticing what's already present and available for appreciation. Our brains are naturally wired to scan for problems and threats, which served our ancestors well in dangerous environments but works against us in modern life, where most of our challenges are not immediate physical threats. When you deliberately look for beauty in ordinary moments, you're retraining your attention away from this default negative scanning pattern. You're teaching your mind to notice positive details that are always present but usually overlooked. This isn't about pretending that problems don't exist or adopting unrealistic optimism. It's about developing the capacity to find genuine satisfaction in the actual circumstances of your life rather than postponing satisfaction until ideal circumstances arrive. The key to making this practice effective lies in understanding that it requires active effort rather than passive waiting. Beauty and interest don't announce themselves. You have to actively search for them, cultivate awareness of them, and train yourself to recognize them in increasingly subtle forms. This foundation of finding meaning and satisfaction in present circumstances naturally leads us to an even more profound perspective shift, one that involves expanding our view to encompass the vast scale of existence itself. Secret number 6. Why billionaires think about death every day, and you should too. Allow me to set the scene. Steve Jobs, in his famous Stanford commencement speech, shared something that most people found deeply unsettling. He revealed that every morning for 33 years, he looked in the mirror and asked himself one question: if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? When the answer was no for too many days in a row, he knew he needed to change something fundamental about his life. This wasn't morbid thinking or pessimistic obsession. Jobs was practicing an ancient Stoic exercise called memento mori, which translates from Latin as remember death. This practice, which Marcus Aurelius used daily during his reign as Roman emperor, represents one of the most powerful tools for clarity and purposeful living ever developed. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal while commanding armies along the Danube frontier, posed a question to himself that cuts through all the distractions and superficial concerns that consume most people's mental energy. He wrote, "Stop whatever you're doing at this moment and ask yourself, am I afraid of death because I won't be able to do this anymore?" This question forces an immediate and honest evaluation of how you're actually spending your life. Think about what this question reveals when applied to common activities that fill our days. Are you afraid of death because you won't be able to scroll through social media anymore? Because you won't be able to watch another episode of a television series you don't even particularly enjoy? Because you won't be able to complain about your coworkers or argue with strangers on the internet? When viewed through the lens of mortality, these activities reveal themselves as fundamentally meaningless ways to spend the irreplaceable hours of our lives. The Roman philosopher Seneca approached this same insight from a different angle, asking even more directly, "You are scared of dying, but tell me, is the kind of life you lead any different than being dead?" This question exposes what Seneca understood as the various forms of living death that people unconsciously choose, Lives filled with resentment that poison every interaction. Lives consumed by regret that prevent any forward movement. Lives dedicated entirely to selfish pursuits that create profound isolation. Consider how this principle transforms the way you approach daily decisions when you truly internalize it. Imagine walking through your typical day with genuine awareness that this could be your final 24 hours on Earth. Which conversations would you prioritize? Which activities would you eliminate immediately? Which relationships would you invest more time in? And which ones would you recognize as energy drains that serve no meaningful purpose? This isn't about becoming obsessed with death or developing anxiety about mortality. The goal is exactly the opposite: to use awareness of life's finite nature as a clarifying force that helps you distinguish between what matters and what merely seems to matter because it's loud, immediate, or socially expected. Let's examine how this works in practice through the experience of Maria, a successful attorney in Chicago who discovered this Stoic principle during a health scare that forced her to confront her own mortality directly. When doctors found a suspicious mass that required several weeks of testing to determine whether it was cancerous, Maria experienced something that initially terrified her, but ultimately transformed her approach to living. During those weeks of uncertainty, Maria found herself naturally applying the mortality questions that Marcus Aurelius had used centuries earlier. Activities that had previously consumed hours of her time. Reading celebrity gossip, watching mindless television, engaging in office politics, suddenly felt not just unimportant but actually offensive to her sense of how precious time really was. More significantly, Maria began having conversations with family members that she had been postponing for years, expressing appreciation that she had taken for granted, and pursuing creative projects that she had convinced herself she would start someday when life calmed down. The possibility of limited time created an urgency that cut through all the excuses and procrastination that had previously prevented her from living according to her deeper values. When the test results came back benign, Maria faced a choice that many people encounter after close brushes with mortality. She could either return to her previous patterns of living or maintain the clarity that awareness of death had provided. She chose to continue the daily practice of mortality reflection, not because she enjoyed thinking about death, but because she had discovered that nothing else was as effective at keeping her focused on what truly mattered. The psychological mechanism behind this practice works by creating what researchers call temporal reframing. Shifting your perspective from the immediate concerns that typically dominate thinking to the longer-term view that reveals what will actually matter when you look back on your life. Most daily stress comes from treating temporary situations as if they were permanent and treating minor inconveniences as if they were major crises. When you regularly remind yourself that your time is limited and unpredictable, you naturally begin prioritizing differently. Petty conflicts lose their emotional charge because you recognize them as unworthy of your finite attention. Meaningful relationships receive more investment because you understand their irreplaceable value. Creative and purposeful activities take precedence over passive consumption because you realize that your capacity to contribute something meaningful to the world exists only while you're alive. Consequently, this awareness of mortality's clarifying power sets the stage for understanding how to transform life's inevitable difficulties from obstacles that defeat us into opportunities that strengthen us. Secret number 7. The ancient trick that makes bad news feel like good news. Suppose you're walking through your life when suddenly everything falls apart. Your job disappears without warning. Your relationship ends unexpectedly, or you receive a medical diagnosis that changes everything you thought you knew about your future. In that moment of crisis, most people experience these events as devastating setbacks that derail their plans and destroy their peace of mind. But what if there was a way to transform these same difficult circumstances into opportunities for growth, strength, and even gratitude? This transformation represents the most advanced and counterintuitive secret in all of Stoic philosophy. It begins with a practice called premeditation of evils and culminates in something the Stoics called amor fati, literally, love of fate. Together, these concepts create a mental framework that can turn your worst days into sources of unexpected strength and wisdom. Let's start with understanding how premeditation of evils actually works, because the name makes it sound far more negative than the practice really is. Seneca explained this principle when he wrote, "You take away power over events by expecting them." What he meant was that difficulties hit us hardest when they catch us completely off guard, when we've refused to acknowledge that challenging things can and will happen in every human life. Think about how most people approach potential problems. They engage in what psychologists call magical thinking, unconsciously believing that if they don't think about bad things, those bad things won't happen to them. This leaves them psychologically unprepared when difficulties inevitably arise, making those difficulties far more traumatic and disorienting than they need to be. The Stoic approach involves deliberately imagining potential challenges not to create anxiety or pessimism, but to build mental resilience and practical preparedness. When you've mentally rehearsed how you might handle job loss, relationship conflicts, health problems, or financial setbacks, you're not shocked into helplessness when these situations actually occur. Instead, you're able to think clearly and respond effectively because you've already considered your options. Consider how this worked in practice for Robert, a small business owner in Denver whose restaurant was forced to close during the economic shutdowns of 2020. While many business owners were completely blindsided by this unprecedented situation, Robert had been practicing premeditation of evils for several years as part of his daily Stoic routine. He had regularly imagined scenarios where his business might face serious challenges: economic downturns, supply chain disruptions, changes in customer behavior, or unexpected regulations. This mental preparation didn't prevent the closing from being difficult or financially challenging, but it did prevent Robert from being paralyzed by shock and despair. Because he had already thought through various crisis scenarios, he was able to quickly shift into problem-solving mode. He pivoted to takeout and delivery services, negotiated with his landlord for reduced rent, applied for emergency business loans, and maintained relationships with his employees so he could rehire them when reopening became possible. More importantly, Robert discovered something that moved him beyond mere crisis management into the realm of amor fati. As he worked through the challenges of keeping his business alive under impossible circumstances, he realized that this crisis was forcing him to develop skills, creativity, and resilience that he never would have cultivated during normal times. The experience was teaching him lessons about business, leadership, and his own capabilities that he couldn't have learned any other way. This realization represents the transition from accepting difficult circumstances to actually embracing them. Amor fati doesn't mean pretending that painful experiences are pleasant or denying that real hardships create real problems. Instead, it means recognizing that every challenge contains opportunities for growth that simply aren't available during easy times. Marcus Aurelius captured this principle perfectly when he wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This isn't just inspirational rhetoric. It's a precise description of how obstacles can be transformed into advantages when approached with the right mental framework. The psychological mechanism behind this transformation involves shifting from a victim mindset to what we might call a student mindset. When you approach difficulties as unwelcome interruptions to your plans, you naturally feel frustrated, helpless, and resentful. When you approach the same difficulties as learning opportunities that can make you stronger, wiser, and more capable, you naturally feel curious, engaged, and empowered. This shift requires practice because our default emotional responses to problems are deeply ingrained. However, the Stoics discovered that you can literally retrain your brain to look for growth opportunities in challenging situations. Each time you consciously ask yourself, "What can this situation teach me?" or "How might this difficulty make me stronger?" you're building new neural pathways that automatically activate during future challenges. The practical application of Amor Fati begins with a fundamental reframe of language and thinking. Instead of saying, "This terrible thing happened to me," you learn to say, "This challenging situation is providing me with an opportunity to develop qualities I couldn't build any other way." Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "How can I use this experience to become the person I want to be?" In essence, this seventh secret reveals that the difference between people who are destroyed by adversity and people who are strengthened by it lies not in the nature of their challenges, but in their approach to those challenges. When you master the art of transforming obstacles into opportunities, you've developed one of the most powerful life skills imaginable. Your next step into Stoic mastery. Throughout this journey together, you've discovered 7 ancient secrets that can transform how you experience every aspect of modern life. These aren't just interesting philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that have been tested by history's most successful people under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Let's quickly weave together what you've learned into a complete system for living. Secret number 1 taught you to stop wasting energy on things outside your control and focus entirely on what you can actually influence. Secret number 2 showed you how 5 minutes of daily journaling can provide the mental clarity that guided Rome's greatest emperor. Secret number 3 revealed why choosing discomfort voluntarily builds the resilience you need when discomfort chooses you. Secret number 4 demonstrated how your thoughts about events, not the events themselves, determine your emotional experience. Secret number 5 opened your eyes to finding genuine satisfaction in ordinary moments rather than constantly seeking extraordinary circumstances. Secret number 6 used awareness of mortality to clarify what truly matters and eliminate what merely seems important. Finally, secret number 7 gave you the ultimate tool, transforming obstacles into opportunities through preparation and philosophical reframing. These 7 secrets work together like instruments in an orchestra. Each one is powerful individually, but when you combine them, they create a symphony of mental strength that can handle whatever life presents. The executive who practices the dichotomy of control while also doing daily journaling develops different capabilities than someone who only uses one approach. The person who combines voluntary discomfort training with mortality awareness builds resilience that neither practice could create alone. Here's what makes this ancient wisdom so relevant to your contemporary challenges. The fundamental aspects of human nature that the Stoics understood haven't changed in 2,000 years. We still struggle with anxiety about things we can't control. We still get caught up in interpretations that create unnecessary suffering. We still waste time on activities that don't align with our deeper values. We still feel overwhelmed when difficulties arise unexpectedly. The difference is that now you have tools that most people never discover. You understand how to direct your mental energy efficiently, build genuine resilience, find satisfaction in present circumstances, and transform challenges into growth opportunities. You've learned secrets that enabled ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things throughout history. Your next step is implementation. Choose one secret that resonated most strongly with you and commit to practicing it daily for the next week. Whether it's morning journaling, cold shower training, mortality reflection, or any other technique, consistent practice is what transforms knowledge into wisdom. Remember, Stoicism isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus were all working on these same challenges throughout their lives. They became masters not because they never struggled, but because they developed reliable systems for handling struggle with grace and wisdom. If this video has provided value in your life, I encourage you to subscribe to the Stoic Vivu channel, where we explore practical applications of ancient wisdom for modern challenges. Like this video if these secrets can help someone you know, and share it with anyone who might benefit from developing unshakable inner strength. Your journey into Stoic mastery begins with the next decision you make. Choose wisely.